Formula One, like sport in general, thrives on controversy. Even if we don't want to see that kind of thing, it sells papers, makes the news, and draws an audience, until it drags on too long and people get tired of it. But what have been the biggest F1 controversies in history? It's a difficult task to select the grades, but we did our best, so stay tuned until the end of the video if you want to know more about them. Number 10. Crashgate and Singapore Grand Prix 2008. Crashgate became such a well-known term to refer to the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix purposeful crashing incident. The term encapsulates the essence of the situation. Nelson Piquet purposely wrecked his vehicle at the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix to bring out the safety car just in time for Fernando Alonso's pit strategy, which resulted in the double world champion Spaniard winning the race. Piquet, the claimed brainchild of Flavio Briatore, no stranger to controversy, and Pat Simons at Renault executed the plan flawlessly, aided by Ferrari, going all Ferrari and mucking up Felipe Massa's pit stop, leaving the Brazilian trapped at the end of the pit lane fuel hose still attached. Piquet remained silent for a whole year until it became evident midway through the next year that he was losing his drive, and his father, triple world champion Nelson Piquet, stepped forward. Briatore and Simons were banned, then unbanned, and the rest is history. Alonso joined Ferrari, Piquet joined NASCAR before winning the first Formula E championship, Briatore departed F1, and Simons presently works at Formula One. 9. McLaren vs Ferrari 2007. This one is full of intrigue, espionage, and a heavy dose of melancholy. During the midst of the 2007 Formula One season, as McLaren and Ferrari's Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, and Kimi Raikkonen were black licorice for the championship, Ferrari made some shocking charges. Nigel Stepney, the ex-head of performance development, had passed on technical specifications of the newest Ferrari to a McLaren engineer. The FIA launched an inquiry, found no proof, and McLaren received no punishment. However, a few months later, with additional evidence, a $100 million punishment was enforced and McLaren was kicked out of the 2007 Constructors' Championship. McLaren subsequently revealed that Renault had obtained comparable intelligence regarding McLaren's vehicles, and the entire F1 world was in danger of devolving into a tit-for-tat sequence of scuffles and finger-pointing. McLaren eventually admitted some culpability, with Ron Dennis claiming to be the one who presented the further proof. Renault was found guilty but went unpunished, while legal actions in Italy against numerous McLaren personnel were withdrawn. F1 was allowed to continue doing what it does best, squabbling about other things. 8. Villeneuve vs Peroni at the San Marino GP, 1982. The unfortunate aspect of F1 is that if there is a significant issue, its protagonist will play out any ramifications at 200 miles per hour on the circuit. That is exactly what occurred in 1982 at Imola, when Gilles Villeneuve and his Ferrari teammate Didier Peroni had a disastrous falling out. Ferrari was on course for a 1-2 in Italy, something most racing drivers strive for, and all they had to do was trundle to the finish to ensure a riotous reaction from the Tifosi. With their only serious rival, Alain Prost's Renault, retiring on lap 4, the two Ferraris had the track to themselves, and Ferrari instructed the drivers to slow down. Villeneuve decided that this also meant keeping station, and that when Peroni passed him later, he was only playing to the audience. As a result, he passed Peroni and slowed down. Peroni won the race on the final lap after making an aggressive pass. Villeneuve was furious. He resolved never to talk to Peroni again, believing he had been deceived. As final qualifying came to an end, Villeneuve left for one more attempt to defeat his teammate and never returned. He died 4 years later in an offshore powerboat racing collision. His partner, Catherine Gu, would later give birth to twins, naming them Charles and Didier after the two legends of motorsport. Number 7. Racing Point RP20, the pink Mercedes, 2020. What do you do if you run out of money in the middle of a season and have to rebuild from the ground up, but you still need to design a vehicle for the following seasons? So how about emulating the most successful automobile on the track? That was the approximate approach that resulted in the Racing Point RP20. Racing Point needed to get back on track with a car in 2020 as new regulations arrived in 2021. So the crew decided to save money by producing what became known as the pink Mercedes. Technically, there was nothing improper with as long as they had developed the automobile themselves, even if that design process was based on images of another car. The RP20 was protested by Racing Point after its rear brake ducts were similar to those on the Mercedes, despite it being made by Renault. The team was fined €400,000 and 15 Constructors' Championship points were removed from the car. This year's protests have been dropped because the FIA has stated that limits on creating your own vehicle will be tighter for the following season, despite the fact all teams have agreed to use the same cars in 2021. 6. The whole of 1994. This one spanned an entire season and had a slew of different issues. The first is an illegal fuel filler, which was discovered after Michael Schumacher's Benetton exited the pits ahead of Ayrton Senna's Williams in Brazil, despite the Brazilian entering the pits first. It was later discovered that Benetton had removed the gasoline filter from the filler, allowing it to fill 12.5% quicker, and this was the cause of a major fire during the German Grand Prix, photos of which have become legendary. Then, during the Pacific Grand Prix at the much-missed Ada track, Ferrari driver Nicola Larini, who was filling in for Jean Alesi, admitted to using traction control during practice. Although Ferrari adamantly denied this, concerns were aroused. Senna, who withdrew on the first lap, was on the sidelines the whole race to hear if cars were utilizing traction control. Michael Schumacher won the World Formula One title after jumping from third on the grid to first place before the first corner of the French Grand Prix. The FIA examined the Benetton B194 and discovered it had launch control, but took no action because there was no evidence that it was used for this purpose. In 1995, he was disqualified for an illegal flaw at the Belgian Grand Prix, passed Damon Hill on the warm-up lap, and disobeyed a stop-go penalty, and was suspended for 2 races. The championship came down to the wire in Adelaide, when, while leading, he veered wide and collided with a wall and ruined its vehicle. 5. Team orders for Barrichello and Schumacher, 2002. Michael Schumacher had won 4 of the first 5 races at what was then known as the A1 ring at the start of the 2002 Austrian Grand Prix, and was already building a dominant championship lead. In the closing stages, he finished second to his teammate, Brazilian Rubens Barrichello, who had not won a race since the middle of the 2000 season. Schumacher was poised to extend his championship lead when he finished second, with his nearest competitor, his brother Ralph, trailing him. The obvious solution was to instruct the drivers to hold the station, but that wasn't the case, because what truly happened was that Ferrari instructed Barrichello to let Schumacher pass with roughly 8 circuits remaining. The FIA was not amused and prohibited team commands in post-race interviews, which were unenforceable. They were booed when they exited their cars and stood on the podium. It would be an understatement to say that they were not a popular pairing. 4. Schumacher vs Villeneuve at Jerez, 1997. I don't want to cast aspersions, but whether it's his fault or not, Michael Schumacher's name appears frequently on our list. It was all his fault in 1997. To win the championship, Schumacher needed to finish ahead of Canadian Williams driver Jacques Villeneuve in the season finale. Villeneuve then made his move on lap 48. He cut the gap on Schumacher's circuit. After lap until he was within striking distance, he identified his opportunity at the dry sack corner and went smoothly up the inside of Schumacher. The front left wheel of the Ferrari collided with the side pod of the Williams. Schumacher ended up in the gravel, his title hopes in tatters, while Villeneuve continued. Schumacher would have won if Villeneuve had retired on the spot, but he kept going, his car plainly damaged, and finished third, good enough for the championship. Schumacher was roundly chastised by everyone, including the German media and Ferrari's home nation of Italy. The FIA intervened, removing him from the 1997 standings but allowing him to maintain all of his race triumphs. Some argued that it wasn't truly a punishment because he hadn't won the title in the first place. 3. Tyrells Exclusion, 1984. Tyrrell was the only team in 1984 to employ a normally aspirated engine, as its competitors all used turbochargers. They were charged with 3 counts of illicit fuel, illegal fuel lines, and illegally installed ballast, and the team was disqualified from the World Championship after missing the last 3 races. They forfeited all championship points as well as the additional subsidized travel privileges for the championship next year. Aside from the severity of the sentence, this was contentious for another reason. Other teams, most notably Brabham and Williams, had devised a smart but deceptive method of achieving the lowest weight prior to the use of turbos. The car was filled with water to pass the weight test by employing water-cooled brakes. How? Though the car would be lightweight throughout the race as the water was thrown out, it was afterward filled up with water and weighed. It was legal since it constituted original automotive fluids according to the text of the law. 2. Senna vs Prost at Suzuka 1990. Prost and Senna collided in 1989, as they had been accustomed to doing, and Prost won the title when Senna was disqualified. Everything went to disaster. McLaren opted to back Senna, and Prost quit. People claim that Prost moved across, and that the FIA's French president favoured the French driver in dismissing Senna. They might be correct, but 1990 was clearer. They were no longer teammates in 1990, yet they were just as close in the title chase. At the same location, 12 months after tempers flared for the first time, some see this as another illustration of Senna's racing spirit, his unwavering desire to win, to close that gap, the one mentioned in the comment about no longer being a racing driver. Others could interpret him as a guy anxious to defeat his bitter opponent, even if it meant putting them both in peril. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost collided on the first lap of the 1987 Italian Grand Prix, with Senna smashing into the rear of Prost's Ferrari as they swept into the first curve. Senna was furious that the pole had been placed on the inside of the grid after qualifying on the same side every year since 1986. The FIA agreed to move it back, only for FISA chairman Jean-Marie Balestre to issue an injunction to have it start on the outside. 1. Hunt vs Lauda at the British Grand Prix, 1976. For some reason, James Hunt won the 1976 Formula One World Championship. Niki Lauda first endured a catastrophic accident and horrific injuries at the Nürburgring before making a miraculous return. Second, Hunt raced on when Lauda refused to do so at the Japanese Grand Prix. Isn't that the whole story? No, not exactly. One race before that deadly second lap at Bergwerk, there was an incendiary event that nearly triggered a mob. James Hunt and Niki Lauda collided during the British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch. The race was called off because the course was littered with rubbish. Officials stated that no driver could continue the race until they had completed the first lap in their original vehicle. But Hunt took a shortcut and arrived at the pits without crossing the line. He was on his way to being disqualified. The stewards at the Japanese Grand Prix allowed Hunt to start the race in a completely repaired McLaren M23, despite the fact that he had not completed the first lap. The audience, who had gathered on a scorching bank to witness their hero, was not pleased. McLaren acted fast, restoring Hunt's car so that he would have his original car even though he did not complete the first laps. Which of these F1 controversies is your favorite? Please let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss any of our incredible videos.